you here for this book talk given by Jerry Murphy for his new book, Dancing in the Rain. Such an intriguing title. One of our students, Sarah, who's here, said, I saw the book on the shelf and I bought it. I knew I had to own a book about dancing in the rain. So that was a perfect way for us to start tonight. I feel so honored to be standing here tonight, speaking about a man who I respect and I admire from the bottom of my heart. I feel like it's a privilege to be able to welcome you here and to tell you a little bit about Jerry Murphy and how I come to know him. First, I knew Jerry as that handsome man in the portrait hanging in Elliott Lyman room, with the smile on his face and his arms outstretched, just like beckoning us to come in and learn with him. Next, I knew him as a superb presenter in programs in professional education, in particular in working with our school principals. Jerry routinely mesmerized the audiences, had them laughing and crying, and in the end, he always got a standing ovation. That is not an easy thing to do from tough, hardened principals. One of my favorite memories of Jerry was working with him at an institute. He actually traveled with us down to Miami-Dade. And we were doing an institute there for all of the principals in Miami-Dade. We're in this huge hotel room. And one of the things Jerry had asked for was, Mary, do you think I could invite my mother? And I said, sure, you can invite your mother. So I didn't know whether his mother would come or not, but she actually did come to the institute, and she got to see her son in action. And I must tell you, it was so heartwarming for this mother to see this man to whom she had given birth and see what an astonishing, talented, genuinely good and dynamic and magnificent teacher that he was. I thought that he also showed what was important to him. His mother was important enough that he asked if she could come to this institute so she could hear him. And I hope someday my sons will think enough of me to invite me to come to something important that they're doing. One evening, Jerry stopped by my office to have a little talk with me. And those of you who may have been privileged to have such talks, you might know where this part is going. So I was the managing director of programs in professional education. Runs about 70 institutes per year, online and on campus. And Jerry thought, what is she thinking? She's managing director of this program, plus she's teaching half-time, plus she's serving on all of her committees, plus she's chairing 5 different institutes. And he asked me if I had ever heard of this thing called the Measure Up Monster. Now, I had never heard of the Measure Up Monster, but Jerry was more than happy to tell me about the Measure Up Monster. And the Measure Up Monster is when we're trying to be perfect, when we're trying to be all things to all people, when we're trying to reach a level that is completely impossible, when we're trying to do what we expect of ourselves and what we think everybody else expects of us. And it's a place that you just don't want to go. And if you've heard Jerry talk, you know that he has lots of props. And he showed me this purple dinosaur, which was the Measure Up Monster. And he suggested that every time I felt like I had to do one more thing, or I had to do this just a little bit better, that I should keep the picture of this Measure Up Monster in my head so I would know that I had to keep that Measure Up Monster in its place. And it was enormously helpful. I mean, I wondered, like, is the wear and tear showing? I wasn't sure, but he's very insightful, and you might think no one is noticing that you're trying to do too much. But Jerry notices, and he cares enough to talk to you about it. I was so moved. Now, much later, Jerry came to me with an idea that, frankly, I thought was a little bit crazy. But it was Jerry. So I said, okay, Jerry, what are you thinking? He wanted to introduce to HGSE something that he said had helped him. And that thing was mindfulness. Now, most of us at that time had never even heard of mindfulness. Jerry was doing what he does so well. He was pushing a boundary, and he was pushing it right here at the school where he served as dean, a school he led as the dean of faculty so magnificently for so many years. He wanted to chair a program called Thriving Under Pressure. We had never heard of such a thing. We were all about achievement in the art of leadership and managing things and making things work. And Jerry wanted to talk about thriving under pressure. Now, this was Jerry Murphy. So what did we say? Sure, give it a try, Jerry. So then Jerry said, I only want a small group. Now, if you work at PPE like I did for so many years, and Stephen Hyde, who's now the managing director, is sitting here tonight, he knows that we're supposed to get 100 people in an institute. And Jerry said, really, I'm trying out this idea. I just want to try it. I want to have 35 people. So it was Jerry. And we said, sure, Jerry, give it a try. He also offered very kind things. They don't need refreshments. We'll take the leftovers from another program. We can collect all the lunches and bring it in. I want to keep it at a low cost because, we're really trying this thing out. So from that small program, Jerry's idea blossomed. He used PPE as an incubator for his idea. Now we see mindfulness everywhere. You can hardly pick up a newspaper or a magazine and you see mindfulness. There are whole books about it. There are whole movements about it. Even our Boston Red Sox have their own mindfulness coach. Who would have thunk it? Jerry, of course, was into mindfulness way before it reached the mainstream. He was way ahead of his time. And Jerry used his work at PPE. He called it like a petri dish. And he kept experimenting. And he knows, because he's been an outstanding leader himself, he knows what kind of pressures are on leaders. The leader is always supposed to look calm, in control, ability to manage anything that might happen or anything that anyone might say or do. But down underneath, he knows that things can be roiling inside. And you're trying to give that calm and professional exterior when inside your mind is going crazy, your heart is racing, and you don't know what to do. Now, you've heard the expression, if you've been a leader, never let them see you sweat. Or the other expression that leaders get as advice is, never let them know that it's OJT. I didn't know what that was the first time someone said that to me. Never let them know that it's on-the-job training. They have hired you for this big, important job to lead this huge initiative, and they don't want to think that you don't know every right move to make every single time something needs to change or needs to happen. Jerry, of course, he knows that leaders get buffeted by winds and rains and sometimes by tsunamis, and that we need some help in this work called leadership. His new book, he says, was made possible by his work in PPE. He says PPE placed its bets on him and on his wonderful partner, Meta McGarvey, who you're going to hear from in a minute, and that we did it when mindfulness was thought to be a kooky idea. That's your word, Jerry, not mine. I said crazy, but I guess they go together. Those of us at PPE knew we were betting on a sure thing, though, because we were betting on Jerry. Everyone is thrilled that mindfulness has become so popular. It's now running twice this year. There are so many people who want to take it, and right now, for the program that's running in November, there's a waiting list. And to those of us who've been running organizations like this, that's like, whew, great, and I'm sure I can see Meta and Jerry both smiling. We hope that other faculty will use PPE as a place to try out ideas. Now, Meta is going to speak to you. Meta is an expert on mindfulness. She's a wonderful partner for Jerry, and we've had the privilege and the pleasure of seeing them both push each other's ideas and each other's thoughts and how to refine things and how to make them better and to take something that's really good and make it great or make it phenomenal. So I'm going to let Meta talk a little bit about Jerry in the book, and then we're going to have an opportunity for some audience interaction and some questions after Jerry makes his own remarks. So you're in for a treat this evening. I give you wonderful Meta McGarvey. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Mary.
Good luck.
And the incredible faith that they placed in us. We're so grateful. I'm also honored and delighted to be here today. This is really just such a wonderful moment. Jerry's been working on this book for such a long time. And I'm sure he's sore from the birthing process. But we're delighted. And thank you all for coming to the launch. Thank you also to our online community of friends and colleagues. We're delighted to have you joining us. At some level, I don't think I need to say any more words after Mary's introduction, but I am going to focus a little bit more on the book. So those of us who've had the privilege of working with Jerry as a professor and as a dean at this school for 18 years have long hoped that he would write a book that captures his insights as a leader, his important insights as a leader, full of his wise perspective and his playful spirit. If any of you have looked at the book already, you know that it's just imbued with his playful spirit. In that vein, Jerry likes to start his talks by joking that the definition of a former dean is someone who has lost all of his faculties. So I'm just here to say at the start, Jerry, clearly you have not lost all of your faculties, both in terms of some of our wonderful colleagues in the room who remain a vibrant, committed community to you of thought partners, and also your impressive clarity and intellectual integration in this book, a kind of clarity to which many of us who are considerably younger aspire even already. So this book is chock full of practical wisdom. It's a masterful synthesis of theory and practice, a real-world, real-life handbook to surviving, thriving, and staying healthy and sane in our work as educators and as educational leaders and in our lives writ large. There's a lot in this book that applies to anyone completely outside of the realm of leadership, but also especially to leaders based on Jerry's many decades of experience. It's an eminently thumbable book, right? You can pick it up and thumb through it to a pithy reminder about how to navigate life's downpours right when you need it most. Or you can slowly read it cover to cover and savor it and try out the exercises for multiple days at a time until you feel like you've really gotten it before moving on to the next one. When life inevitably knocks us down, it's all too easy to slip into complaining about others, beating ourselves up, or losing sleep over coulda, woulda, shouldas, right? Jerry reminds us how to get up off the floor when life's knocked us down. And that's by bringing to mind and acting on our values. That's front and center in this book. Acting on our values, not those self-defeating negative thoughts and feelings. But Dancing in the Rain does more than help us get up off the floor. It says, don't stop there. Take it further. Get out on the dance floor, right? So the deeper power of this approach is that it's both and. This is a book that's fully realistic about life's storms and chooses to dance instead of be derailed. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So reading it, we know that Jerry has truly been there as a classroom math teacher, a policy advisor to the Department of Education in the Johnson administration, an educational researcher and professor, a Harvard dean. He knows what it means to be an educational leader from the most humble, informal contexts to high visibility, high stakes contexts. We know we're in the trustworthy hands of an author who understands how much it hurts to be a lightning rod, which inevitably you are when you're in a leadership position. How it feels to make mistakes and see them play out in public, where you just want to collapse in mortification to see what's going on, the turmoil, and you're at the center of it. How it feels to fall short of our goals and aspirations. Having taught with Jerry for more than 10 years, I can honestly say that in my work with leaders, in education, in healthcare, in nonprofit organizations, not a day goes by that I don't find myself sharing some pearl of wisdom that I learned from Jerry, literally. So as an author who fully embraces the ups and downs of being an educational leader and a human being, Jerry reminds us that you don't have to feel good to do good. If there's one takeaway from his book, I think it's that. And that by changing what we do, by choosing figuratively and literally to dance, we can change the way we feel and continue to perform even when we feel like we can't. So choosing to dance in the rain helps us get back on track more quickly by playfully celebrating being fully alive and keeping our values front and center. And that is how we can most fully be of value to others and live a life that's rich with wisdom and meaning and service and accomplishment, which is why we're all educators in the first place, I think. So by focusing on the inner life of leaders, Jerry leads us in a revolutionary turn within. And as Mary said, he was out there before anyone else was doing it here. So in that turn within, we surface the deeply painful moments of self-doubt and regret that all leaders experience at times. And he's done that with courage and clarity and compassion and provided us with so many wise practices and tips that can help us remember to show up as our best selves even when we feel far from our best. And in accord with the saying attributed to another great revolutionary, Emma Goldman, I could not agree more that if I can't dance, I do not want to be a part of your revolution. So please give a hearty, heartfelt, and very warm welcome to our good friend and colleague, Jerry Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. God, it's great to be here, and I really appreciate those very, very warm remarks. Also, the summary of my book was so good, I'm inclined just to say, let's open it up for questions. But and after you hear me, you may wish that I did. I'm surprised that nobody has asked about my prop, which goes along with what Mary said, that mindfulness is everywhere. And I came across this recently. It's mindful mayonnaise, which proves that it is literally spreading everywhere. So my thanks to Mary and to Meta and to all of you for joining us here this evening. And also thanks to those people who are joining us remotely. This is the first time a distinguished lecture series speaker from the library has been live streamed, and I'm delighted that we're doing it. And I'm happy to say, Mary, when you talked about my mother visiting me when I went down to Florida, my sister, Jean, who is also with her, is able to be with us tonight, and it's very touching for me. And also, I'm happy to say that my wife is able to be with us as well. I'd also like to offer a special word of thanks to all those who have made this event possible, and especially I'd like to thank my Ann Krowowski on the library staff. I didn't get that right, did I, my Ann? But I came close. She's been terrific and has been a wonderful help in making all this possible. Let me tell you what I have in mind tonight. I'd like to spend maybe 15, 20 minutes or so presenting some highlights of my book, and that will be followed by a question and answer period. And then along the way, I may tell a story or two if somebody will ask, but when I was preparing this, I tried to tell some stories, but the stories went on and they took so long, so I didn't include them, but there are lots of stories in here. And then we're going to conclude with one of the 30-plus exercises in the book, which is Dancing in the Rain, where we are going to get up and dance in the rain. And we're literally going to dance, and the rain we're going to be dancing in is the kind of the rain that we feel sometimes in our head. And it's to give you a visceral sense of what it's like to both be feeling bad and being able to be fully alive through dancing. I will say in advance that this is a voluntary activity. You don't have to do it at all. And there are some people who don't like to dance, and there's some people who aren't able to dance. So it's something that I welcome you to do if you're up to doing it. So let me get this going. All right. Now that's not right. It's not. That's at the end, not at the beginning. So we need to go to the beginning of the slides. Huh? Pardon me? No, that's at the end, very end. All right, that's it. Okay. First of all, I should say that in the book, that I acknowledge more than 100 people by name. And many of these people are my family and friends and close colleagues, and also amazing scholars whose work I relied on and whose work goes back more than 2,500 years. So I start by offering a deep bow to all those people that made it possible for me to write this book. I write it, it has my name on it, but it really bears the imprint of so many wonderful people that I'm so excited to have worked with or read their work. Let me begin where the book begins, which is a story about somebody I encountered once in a State Department of Education who had this poster on his wall. And I went up and looked at the poster, and this was a very funny guy, and it said, the job of every dedicated State Department of Education employee is to thoroughly analyze all situations, to anticipate all problems before they happen, to have solutions for the problems immediately that you can put into place, and in fact you put them into place. However, when you're up to your ass in alligators, it's hard to remind yourself that your original job was to drain the swamp. So I guess in part I would start by saying, how many of you feel occasionally that you're up to your eyeballs in alligators in the work that you do? I think it's part of working in organizations today. So let me start by telling a word about what the book is. I think about it as living vital lives in tough times. I think my passion is really to help educators really live lives of purpose and consequence in the midst of all the stress and strain that they follow or they fall into. And these are things that often are not talked about in schools and not often talked about in universities. I recently got a letter from a colleague who had read it, and he said, it's a book about doing good while staying sane and healthy. And that may be even a better title than what I said. That's what really I'm about. How do you do good in this very complicated world and stay both sane and healthy? And if you're managed to do that, that's really a wonderful thing to have accomplished. The skills that I want to talk about briefly today that give you just a sense of what the book is about, I think can easily fall into these categories. First, managing your mind really has to do, it's an inside job. How do you deal with all the thoughts and feelings that you have that course through your mind in such a way that you're capable and able to handle the situation? Second is showing your human side. That's more of an outside job. With all the stuff going on the inside, how do you translate that to the outside where you can have all this riling within you, but you can perform in a way which is acceptable and which leads you to a healthy position of leadership. And then finally, which Metta mentioned, which is living your values. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about managing your mind because it is the most complicated and the most counterintuitive. I'm going to talk about showing a human side in the questions and answers if anybody has any questions. And then I'm going to talk about living your values, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay. The audience, as Meta said, really is educational leaders, but as she pointed out, I think, and the feedback that I'm getting from people is, yeah, it talks mainly about educational leaders, but it really talks about me, how I'm struggling with life, with all the pressures, all the changes that are taking place in society, all the troubling kind of situations, trying to make sense of a difficult world. How can I figure out how to live successfully in that complicated world? I'm going to suggest that you think outside the box, but you're going to learn that you never, ever should think outside the box, and many of us have a voice in our head which says you shouldn't think outside the box. But what I'm going to suggest involves that. My perspective is building on what Mary said, that administrative work can be really rewarding. I had a great time as a dean, working with wonderful teachers and faculty and administrators, both at the school level and also across the university. Got involved in working on tremendous projects that were exciting and interesting, and had the sense of being part of something that was bigger than myself. So I found it a terrific experience. At the same time, it was really, really hard. And it was really hard because of the tremendous pressures you face, the alligators that are constantly biting at you, the expectation that you're going to be doing more with less makes the job really hard. And I think Mary has this wonderful way of describing it. And she talks about hardest job we'll ever love. And I think that's a wonderful way to put it. Work, I think, is hard largely because it's highly emotional. And when I think about highly emotional and how to kind of capture that, I went to this. Anybody know what that is? This is the characters in the movie Inside Out. And the Inside Out is this wonderful movie about this young girl who is living in Minneapolis or in Minnesota, and she was moving out to California because her parents were moving. She had to go. And she had this tremendous sense of loss and tremendously upset about doing it. And the movie really talks about all the voices that she had in her head. And there you on the left, you have Mr. Purple, who kind of is frightened and fearful. And next to that is Miss Green, who is disgusted about what is going on. And there you have Mrs. Yellow, who is joyful. Now, in the movie, she's both joyful, and she's also trying to get other people to be joyful when they're not joyful. So, which is and on the ground, you have the most wonderful character, Miss Sad, and it was just amazing character. And then you have on the right, Mr. Red, who is angry and frustrated. When I look at that, I think about the head of this child in the movie, but I look at that, and I think that's inside the head of most administrators we know, in the sense that we have the same kind of coursing of various emotions, and very complicated. And what do we do with these various things when we're under the pressure? And I think these basic emotions kind of capture the range of things that administrators, as well as children, have to deal with. So, and these feelings, I would argue, are perfectly normal. And one of the aspects that I think is wonderful about the movie Inside Out is it's basically saying, you know what? It's okay for kids to be sad. You know, it's okay for them to really be upset. It's okay for them to get angry. These aren't crazy things. These are normal human feelings that we all have. And we got to make room for those feelings. So the movie, in lots of ways, legitimates the feelings of kids. And in part, what I'm trying to do is legitimate these same kind of feelings that administrators have. What do you do with these things? And these things are perfectly normal. And in the case of administration, I think they're inevitable. The problem is, I would argue, that we overreact. And it's not that these basic feelings are bad or there's something wrong. It's how we respond to them that causes us the most problems. And the way I think of it is, you can think of it a little bit as if it were poison ivy, okay? And the problem with poison ivy is not that you have the itch, or it's not that you even have poison ivy. You know, in life, you're going to have poison ivy. And it's not the itch. You're going to have an itch. The problem with poison ivy is we scratch the itch. And it's the scratching of the itch that makes the problem. And it's the scratching of the itch, so to speak, I think, in administration. It's not the basic emotional aspects of the job, but it's the scratching of the itch that makes it difficult in administrative life. And my argument is that we scratch along the lines of what I call the 3 R's. Being an educator, of course, I have to come up with some kind of 3 R's or something education. So instead of reading, writing, and arithmetic, my argument is that we resist, we ruminate, and rebuke ourselves. And it's not the feelings that we have, but it's what we do with those feelings that make life more complicated. We resist by pushing away things, as we hear. We resist feeling bad, we resist these feelings, and we try to get rid of them. And one way we hold them off, or we push them away, or we bottle them up, or, as we see, I think in this case, what many of us may do, we sweep the feelings under the rug. And again, it's not that the feelings are bad, but it's the sweeping the feelings under the rug that can cause us the real problems. And psychologists will tell you that what we resist persists. The second is rumination. Now, rumination itself, to ruminate, if you use it in a non-psychological term way, as a regular word, to ruminate, to think, is really a great thing. But rumination gets to be a problem when you go into these spirals of deep negative thoughts that go on and down, and you go in deeper thinking about what's wrong with this and what's wrong with that, and keep thinking about it incessantly. And it sometimes looks like this. Now, Mary says we talked about what you're supposed to look like when you're a dean. Or when you're an administrator, if I had been an artist, this would have been a self-portrait of me as dean of the school half the time. And that's a problem. Okay? And you're laughing because you were there. I am not responsible for Murphy's Law, but God knows I spent a lot of time dealing with Murphy's Law. But it's the rumination can really dig a deep hole for us. And the third is we rebuke ourselves. And I think at a place like Harvard, you see it. Mary described it. This is a land of perfectionism. We're going to get it. We're strivers. We're going to be perfect, and we're not perfect. What do? We beat ourselves up, and we end up doing this. I find this a very poignant picture that I can really associate with. What do? We don't get things done. We beat ourselves up, and then we beat our head against the wall. It's these things that really cause us the real difficulty. And it ends the effects of overreacting, I put in this little formula, which is stress times 3R equals mind made misery. So it's not the stressful thoughts and feelings that are the problems. It's how we multiply them by these various activities. And if somebody up close can read this with passion, what the stressed out guy says, because I think it captures that. It's not just stress, it's more than that. Anybody want to read that? Just, yes.
I'm so stressed out about being stressed out that I can't even remember why I'm stressed out, and it's stressing me out.
All right. Okay. As opposed to what? What do you do with the stress? I mean, the question in part, what do you do with it? Now, the result of that, I think, is we become weary. We sometimes behave rationally, and most important, I think, we forget about what our values are. We forget about those things that are most important to us because we get so hung up in dealing with the issues of being stressed out. Okay, so how do you curb these overreactions? And I'm going to suggest that we do it by paying attention to where we place our attention. Now you say, what the heck does that mean? And my argument would be is that we all spend a lot of time paying attention, but unless we're trained, we don't spend very much attention paying attention to where we place our attention. And what is that called? That's one way of describing what mindfulness is. Kind of at the heart of mindfulness is paying attention to where we're paying attention and learning how to do that. Now, I describe it this way in those kind of terms because I think some people sometimes associate mindfulness with some kind of mysterious, deep woo process that we don't understand. And some people may have that as part of their practice. But a lot of it is very practical, learning how to pay attention to where you place your attention, because it can make a big difference. My argument would be, how do you do that? You can go inside and you can observe your mind. Now, for many of us who are not in the business of, again, being into mindfulness, are quite familiar with the notion of observing something that's happening in the outer world. I mean, we can be qualitative researchers and we observe what's going on in a classroom. But the idea of kind of standing back and watching what's going on in our mind is a new and novel idea. And my suggestion is that in doing so, that we can learn to detect the 3 R's. We can learn to observe them. And my argument in part would be that in our mind, it's like we have a flashlight in our mind. And if you look around at what's going on at your thoughts and feelings, what you notice is your mind wanders all over the place. And it's really kind of amazing if you watch your mind to see what's going on. And what one discovers also, if you read the research, is that we have, on average, according to at least one study, 1,000 thoughts every hour. I mean, the mind is going all the time, and the mind is going all over the place. But through mindfulness, one of the things you can do is you can learn to kind of observe what you're observing and know that you're observing. So what you can do, for example, is you can go around and, so to speak, you're observing your thoughts and your feelings and activities and patterns, and you can go, for example, say, there I am. There's part of me that's ruminating. Okay? There's another part of me that seems to be rebuking myself. And then what one can learn to do is to divert your attention. So, there I seem to be ruminating. I'm going to divert my attention to an antidote. I'm going to divert my attention to something else. So through the mindfulness process where you're aware of what's going on, you literally can watch what's happening. Now, this is not easy to do, and it takes a lot of development to do well. And then you can divert your attention to something else. Let me say a word about what these antidotes might be. Just to give you an idea. So instead of pushing things away and really under the rug, one can learn to open up and allow things to be just as they are. It's the exact opposite. Instead of pushing things away, you can learn to allow things to be just as they are. Now that's easy to say, but it's really, really very hard to do. But you can learn how to do that by practicing mindfulness. Instead of ruminating, which is basically a process of thinking about the past and the future, you can turn your mind, you can detect that that's happening, and turn your mind to the present moment. Because in the present moment, you're engaged in experiences that are going on right now, as opposed to thinking about the past and the future. So you can learn to say, I'm ruminating. I've got to figure out how to move to the present moment. And in the process of moving to the present moment, you're not ruminating anymore. Now, you go back and forth, of course. Now, a lot of people talk about the present moment, as they should, is really very important about what it does and the importance of being there and smelling the roses and being in contact with what's going on. But a huge benefit of being in the present moment is what you're not doing. And what you're not doing when you're in the present moment is you're not ruminating. And then thirdly, instead of beating yourself up, you can decide to take care of yourself. Just the opposite. And probably the most discussed way of taking care of yourself that people talk about now is self-compassion. And there's a lot of literature about you can develop skills of self-compassion. And you literally can learn to say, I've got to do that. I'm going to deal with it the opposite, and I'm going to focus on taking care of myself. Anybody know who that is? Right. It's me. I put it in there because this was way before your time. This is when things were slightly crazy. I wouldn't get away with it now, probably. But around Christmas time, every year, I used to get dressed up as Santa Claus. And I used to visit every office in the school, in every building, and hand out candy canes to everybody I saw in every office. And people tolerated it. And some people laughed. And I will say, I mean, I see people now who say, were you the dean of the School of Education? Yes. I say, well, and I occasionally say, well, do you ever remember anything I did? They don't remember a thing that I did in terms of curriculum. Oh, weren't you Santa Claus? Yes, that was me. I was Santa Claus. When I did it back then, I was playing Santa Claus because this was Christmas time. By that, everybody was wrought out at that time of year. They were exhausted. It was at the end of the semester. And I thought it would be a help to the school just to kind of loosen things up a bit and just to kind of lighten things up and to get their mind off their work. What I've discovered and what I've thought about, what I've learned, is intuitively what I was doing was I was taking care of myself. That was the other thing that I was doing. Because somehow, intuitively, I knew that I needed a break, that I was in bad shape, that I was wrought. There was too much that was going on. And by doing this, I was having a lot of fun, and I was nourishing myself. And these kind of nourishing activities, I would argue, can be really very helpful and the opposite of what we see here. So the basic argument I'm making, and it's complicated, is that many of us live on the left-hand side, okay? And we can learn to identify the left-hand column. And there are ways of not doing the opposite. Not easy, but we can learn the right-hand column. And in learning the right-hand column, it really deals with reducing in a significant way a lot of the useless stress that can really get in our way. And I would end by, if I would say there was a bottom line on this, it is manage stress by reacting less. And I'm big into a few words of things you can remember. So I think you can even think about manage stress by reacting less, which this was about. But then I was thinking about it, not only could you say it as a word, you can imagine saying it as managing stress by reacting less. And then I thought about, today I was saying, maybe you can turn that into a song, managing less by reacting less, and then managing stress by reacting less, just to preview what's coming. But we can make big progress in dealing with this. Okay, let me shift gears and say a couple of words about living your values. And I think it has three components, and then I'll open it up for questions. First component is clarifying what are your values, what really matters to you. And when I talk about what matters to you, I'm not talking about what matters to you on just kind of a regular basis. I'm talking about kind of what are those things that really matter to you, and matter to you at the level of the heart and soul. What are those things that really drive you? And when I see people around here are a couple that come into mind. People around here, in my experience, they really want to do good work. They care deeply about service. And being at the Ed School, I think people are here because they're fighting the good fight, where they're working on issues where they often don't get the kind of recognition they want, but they're doing it because they really value fighting the good fight. Second way you can talk about values is what kind of person do you want to be? And one way to think about that is, if you were to go ahead to your retirement, what would you like people to say about you? And what the kind of things that you want people to say to you are the kind of things that one can talk about as values. And I think again, people around here I know, they like people to talk about being caring or trustworthy or creative, and the list goes on. And then thirdly, what do you stand for, which is a slightly different twist on it. What values have to do, what am I going to stand up for? What am I going to die for? What are those things that really move me in my life? And here I think that come to mind at the school, I hear people talking about justice, inclusion, mutual respect, and the list goes on. So on the last point, I have a quote from my colleague, Bob Peterkin, which really captures it for me, which is, if you don't stand for something, you sit still for anything. And values have that kind of quality. The second, and here's just a range of values. Anybody see any in there that come to mind to you or remind you of values that are particularly important to you? Okay. Second characteristic of values is what I call viva via. Values, it's not just a matter of having values, but it's a matter of putting your values into action. And these climbers are a good example. You can look at them and say, well, where are they going? And it's helps you to make the distinction between goals and values. The goals in this case is they want to get to the top of the mountain. But the values is some sense of adventure or some sense of being at the cutting edge, or at least some kind of motivating forces. And those values really make a difference, and putting them into action is crucial. I think of this as an exemplar. Does anybody know who that is? Yes? Sitting Bull. There's a wonderful exhibit at one of the Harvard museums, the Peabody Museum, about Sitting Bull and Custer's last stand and his role, and it takes a very sympathetic look at Sitting Bull. And in it, it talks about Sitting Bull being revered by his people for his generosity, his kindness, and his humility. Those are the kind of things I'm talking about when we talk about values. Anybody know who that is? Yeah, right. Actually, somebody looked at it the other day and says, it's the way you're going to look in a year from now after trying to sell your book. That's Darwin, right? Did I get it? Charles Darwin. The third characteristic of values is not only what they are, putting them to action, is even when it hurts. And the thing I want to point out about Charles Darwin in this particular case is, and he was dedicated to science and to natural science, and he spent 5 years on His Majesty's ship, the Beagle, terribly seasick. It nearly killed him. So he pursued his values when it nearly killed him because they were so important. Another example, I think you all know who that is. Barbra Streisand, okay. Another example of living your values even when it hurts. Barbra Streisand, at least some reports, has stage fright. And there was a long period when she couldn't even get on the stage. But recently, she did this wonderful tour. You can just imagine what it took for her to do that. There she was living her values even when it made it so difficult for her to do it. Which leads to the bottom line here, that VIA, value-inspired action plus courage, results in something of meaning. And I put such a big emphasis on meaning because in the stress-filled world, you want to do those things in life that I think give you a sense of meaning to kind of counteract the other more difficult things. Let me conclude with a couple of thoughts to remember. And these are perhaps thoughts to remember when you're really up against the wall, when you're really feeling all the pressure of the job that you have or working in school and so on. The first is, we are bigger than our stress. I mean, I think a lot of us get so stressed out and so caught up, and we think all our life is our stress. And what I write about, what other people write about, we're much bigger than that. We have this capacity for awareness, which allows us to relate differently to our stress in such a way that it doesn't have the power that it may have without taking advantage of that awareness. We have this capacity for really thinking about our values and putting them into place, which can make a huge difference in our life. And we have this capacity which is underutilized to take care of ourselves because it's undervalued in our society. And so we're much bigger than our stress. And the second, we're the authors of our own lives. How we respond to stress is up to us. we're not the victim of circumstances. We can change the impact of stress has on us, and we can do other things to make our lives better. And it leads up, we can live, I think, vital lives even in tough times. And I think that's reason for congratulations. All right, thank you. How are we doing on time?
I don't know. I don't quite have the time. The right time? 6:30. It's 6:30.
Okay, just a couple minutes then.
Yeah, so let's take a couple of questions and then we'll get into the final activity. Yes.
Thank you first for presenting such wonderful work that's close to my heart. Thank you for all you're doing to pave the way here at Hugsy and in other institutions.
Yeah,
I really
have to hold the microphone
very close.
very close. And unfortunately, if you don't use the microphone, the people who are on remote won't be able to pick up the audio at all.
So I was starting by thanking Mr. Murphy for his wonderful presentation. I have the privilege of going into schools and working with organizations on bringing mindfulness into the school system in New York City and in Los Angeles. And my question for you is, why do you think that this is so revolutionary? After my teacher trainings and workshops, often get the question from social workers, well, this isn't anything we don't know already. So why is this something that's so difficult to bring to institutions like Harvard? I'm a graduate from last year's cohort and felt very alone in the mindfulness fight here. What makes this controversial?
Well, I think it's somewhat controversial, or much less controversial than it used to be, because people associate it with kind of religion, for one thing, and they associate it with some kind of mysterious processes for another. And the point that you make, which I was trying to make, is we're learning to pay attention to how we pay attention. That process has not only worked out in mindfulness, but in other areas. And people don't see that until you spend some time, I think, with them. So I think it's the history of it. And also, I looked at, there was a booklet put out by Time magazine recently on mindfulness. And on the front page is this picture of this lovely woman who just looks like she's an outer worldly experience. And for some people, it is that. And that's an important part of it. But a lot of people really want to engage in things that are practical, that have something to do with what will help the kids tomorrow, and they're thrown off, I think, by these images. I think as people get more into it and see it for what it is, and rather than the label, that they're more willing to use it. I know some people at Teachers College that I've spoken with a year or so ago who used to teach mindfulness in schools, particularly in the South, and they never used the word mindfulness. And they purposely didn't use the word mindfulness because it would raise all these kind of issues. And then on the other side of it, when they were doing these things, they said, well, let's give this a label. And say, oh, is that what it is? Gee, this is not airy-fairy or something. This isn't interfering with my religious beliefs. This isn't doing this and that. So I think that's part of what's going on.
Questions? Comments? Thoughts?
Jerry, I want to thank you. I just was having almost a religious experience and wishing that I had had this book when I was superintendent, because I did all three of those R's repeatedly.
You did?
Yeah.
You did all what?
All the three R's repeatedly. And some of them even carry over into the work that I'm currently doing.
You got to speak up.
I'm sorry. Just thank you.
Thank you.
And
say it again loud. All right.
Thank you. I will be using it with my students.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello. I really appreciate your wonderful presentation here. And my question is on the observing your mind. So you mentioned what to do it, but I'm thinking of how to do it a little more detail. I haven't read the book, so I think that probably there will be more. When you are detecting the stress, just by detecting the stress, does it lower the stress?
Acknowledging the stress lowers it, and would also, I mean, I'll give you an example. Every morning, practically, I've got a list. I have a wake-up list of things that I can do, and I have it on my computer. Susan, you wouldn't be surprised at having the list, right? And I have on the list one of the things I call my ABCs. And again, because of education. And I fall into the pattern of every morning going to my ABCs. And what is A? A stands for awareness, B stands for breathing, and C stands for compassion. And I'll say a word about those. So I sit down, and I just kind of sit down and I, so to speak, go inside, and I kind of get a sense of what's going on inside of me. And every morning, in my case, I'd say, what shows up is a sense of being overwhelmed. Just too much on my plate. So instead of pushing that away, I said, okay, I'm just going to let that be there. I acknowledge it, and let's just spend some time being with it, and just let it. And it's, somebody once said that, you know, the word emotion, the way to think about the word emotion is it's E for energy in motion. And I think it's a helpful way to think about it, that it's a lot of energy around being overwhelmed in the morning. If I sit there and just let it be, it'll disappear of its own. If you fight it, if you resist it, you rebuke, you beat yourself up, then you're going to get yourself in trouble. So just let it be. So that's the A. The B, then I kind of focus in, and I try to go into some deep breathing. And the deep breathing is more of a concentration meditation, and that can often help you kind of calm the mind down. And the C is what I always say to myself, you know, I'm overwhelmed. I use two, what I think of as magic words, which are of self-compassion, and I use them all the time, which come from a woman named Anne Kaiser Cornell and Weiser Cornell. And those two words are no wonder. So you say, you know, I'm really overwhelmed, what's going on? And this person say, you know, no wonder you're overwhelmed. Look at all that's going on in your life. You know, something's really happening over here. And it's, you know, instead of just beating yourself up for it, say, no wonder you're feeling that way. You know, no wonder you're screwed up. You know, look at the odds against you. No wonder you didn't get that accomplished. Now, people are fearful that somehow if you're kind to yourself, that it's going to make it worse and you're going to be self-indulgent and you're not going to... The research shows that the exact opposite is true. So I find in a short period of time, I can kind of, what's going on in my mind, and just sit with it, acknowledge it, and sit with it, debriefly, and then try to show compassion and use those words can make a nice difference, a nice way to start the morning.
Jerry, it's great to see you back at the Ed School. I'm glad you wrote this book. It's a great book. Thank you. I wanted to ask you to talk for a moment about the balance between kind of managing your mind and looking inwards, and also paying attention to the world and doing what you would do. So as you were showing the picture of the crocodile, I remember an old joke, which is a patient that goes to the psychologist and says, I'm having nightmares about this crocodile. And the doctor says, well, we're probably too overwhelmed, you should relax, and so on. And the next week, the same story, and he gives him 2 pills. And third week, the same thing. And the fourth week, the patient doesn't come, and the doctor calls, says, what happened to so-and-so? Well, the crocodile ate him. And so these crocodiles are not just in your mind. They're the real world
Right.
makes real demands of you.
Right.
And there is a certain survival value
Right.
to these emotions that are so well portrayed in the movie Inside Out. So if you tame all that stuff all too much, now the crocodile may eat you. And so what are your thoughts about how do you balance being in the world while taking care of yourself? Because these demands are real. They're not imaginary.
One way I would answer that, I take care of myself because I want to be better at taking care of the world. I am interested, my ultimate goal is not to, you know, just sit around looking at my navel. But if I think if I can learn to be a better manager of my stress, then I'm going to be in a much better position to look out and make a difference in the world. And so I see it as a kind of an indirect but important first step in doing the kind of things that a lot of us want to do.
My question sort of follows on Fernando's, because I can imagine the ABC list and the...
You imagine what?
The ABC list. And I still write TTD, things to do. Jerry taught me that every day. But then you go to work. And, you know, the people, many of them mean, though well-intentioned, you have to do something about them, with them, in response to
Right.
them. And you do it on behalf of other people. It's not just that you're protecting yourself. So how do you think about managing that in a mindful way?
I think about is getting engaged in some of these practices sets me up to be better able to deal with the stuff that gets thrown at me, because I'm calmer, I'm less stressed out when in those situations, and I also kind of can hone my sense of humor and kind of step back and watch some of the craziness that's headed my way and just kind of slough it off more. So I think this internal stuff that we talked about has big implications for dealing in this real world that we encounter every day. Not every day. It doesn't work every day. But I think it can make a big difference. Let me give you one other quick example of one of the techniques, if you will. I call it CVS. I'm big on acronyms. I know people hate acronyms. But I find what CVS is, C sounds for count your blessings, V means relish your victories, and S stands for show up as your bigger self. And I found if I wake up grumpy in the morning, and that really will set you up to be in a bad position with the kind of people you're talking about, I can kind of click in and say, okay, it's a time to sit back, and I'm going to spend a couple of minutes to talk about my blessings, all the great things that are going on in my life. And then the relish the victories is we have a tendency to kind of forget the things that really we did well and kind of hook onto the things we did well, that hook onto those things that are awful. And then I try to say, okay, what did I do in the last couple of days that was really a victory? You know, maybe I helped somebody out at school and nobody else knows it, but I did. And I just want to relish the fact that I made a big difference. Nobody knows about it. Nobody's ever going to know about it except me. But I'm going to take some pride and I'm going to take some joy in what was done. And then the S showing up as your bigger self is, instead of going out in that world as kind of that grumpy, reactive person all set to be, I'm going to show up as that part of me that's kind of more open and willing to hear and to laugh at the kind of the craziness of the world.
We were going to let Susan have the final word, but one of your students is here, and he'd like to have the final word.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Roger Disajos. I'm originally from Haiti, and I was one of your students about maybe 34 years ago, back in 19...
I think it was 35.
Back in 1982, and I graduated, with a master's degree. And you taught a very interesting course, community psychology. And then you wrote a book about it, about the Kong, a group of people who live in Africa.
No.
So.
No, it was a great course, but it wasn't me.
It was not you?
No, it wasn't me.
Well, no.
Okay, but I'll read the book and comment.
It
Okay.
was not you?
No.
Well, and when I came the other day, 2 weeks ago, and I saw that we were going to give a conference today, and I said, well, it takes the opportunity to come to say hi.
Well, we're delighted that you came. Thank you very much.
And after graduation, I went back to Haiti, and I became a senator. And then I returned, and at that time, it was during the 90s, and then you were at that time a dean, if I can remember, and I stopped by to your office.
There we go.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank
I'm
you.
very happy to see you again.
Thank you so much for being here, and we're going to move into the dancing
All
in the
right.
rain.
All right. Promise? Okay. So I thought we'd end with a visceral experience of dancing in the rain. And so we're going to get up and dance, those who want to do it. And we're going to dance to Elvis's Jailhouse Rock. Contemporary of me more than some of you. And so this is not just dancing. And the notion is the dancing in the rain is that the idea is that when you're feeling bad, that you're able sometimes, at the same time, do some things that make you come alive. You can both feel bad and, as Meta put it, do good at the same time. And this is an experiment in doing this. Now, we're going to do the dancing part of it. Now, if you're willing to do it, then we have to get, I want you to, so to speak, get the pain in your mind so you're feeling bad. So all right? No, I mean, otherwise it's just dancing. And it's really, this is important. This is really that somehow when you're feeling bad, you can do things that in the process of doing them can make you feel good. In the process of making you feel fully alive, the bad feeling can at least dissipate for a while. So if you're willing to take the next step, just stand up and find yourself a spot where okay. And you, yeah. Okay. And now you can do it. You can do it right here. You can do it right here, and you do not have to have a partner. Okay. So, all right. So I want you to take a moment or two and just kind of go inside, and I want you to spend a moment or two trying to identify something that's going on in your life that's makes you kind of unhappy or sad. And it doesn't have to be the most important thing that's going on, but something that kind of brings up negative feelings, bad feelings. It can be about your work. It can be about yourself. And just spend a moment or two just being with those feelings. While you're feeling that sense of hurt or loss or sadness, see whether you can also, at the same time, dance. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I'll try this more often.
So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Everyone sign your books. And this is mine that I have just marked off so many pages. That
Very nice to see you.
Thank you all.